The last thing Olivia Carter expected during a routine traffic stop was to encounter a seasoned police officer who would fabricate an entire story about their interaction. As a retired Navy SEAL lieutenant commander, Olivia had faced perilous situations worldwide, but this moment struck at the very core of her identity. Standing in the dim evening light, checking directions on her phone, she had no idea she was about to become the focal point of a real-life battle for justice. Officer Mark Reynolds approached with an air of authority, his flashlight's beam cutting sharply against Olivia's face. 2 decades of military service had honed her ability to read people, and everything about his stance screamed trouble. Though she could have easily defended herself, her SEAL training had prepared her for far worse. She chose restraint. This was a battle to be fought in an entirely different arena. When Reynolds slammed her against his patrol car, shouting false charges of assault and resistance, he had no clue who he was dealing with. What followed was a legal battle that exposed more than just one officer's prejudice. It unmasked a systemic failure that had been overlooked for far too long. Inside the grand courtroom, Olivia sat with military composure as Officer Reynolds delivered his fabricated testimony. Her sharp eyes followed his every move, identifying the subtle tells she had been trained to recognize. A slight tremor in his hands, the forced confidence in his stance. "She became aggressive," Reynolds declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. "When I tried to de-escalate, she reached for my weapon." A murmur swept through the gallery, but Olivia remained still, her hands folded on the oak table before her. Beside her, her young attorney, Daniel Hughes, shifted nervously. "We need more," he whispered, anxiety thick in his voice. "His word against yours won't be enough." Olivia's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Patience, Daniel. The truth has its own timing." As the prosecution built its case, Olivia's memory of that night played vividly in her mind. The harsh glare of Reynolds' flashlight, his immediate hostility, the cold metal of the patrol car pressed against her cheek. 20 years of elite military training had taught her to master her reactions, to select her battles wisely. That night, she had chosen restraint, not out of fear, but out of strategy. When the defense took its turn, Olivia took the stand. The courtroom hushed as she spoke, her voice steady and unwavering. "I was checking my phone for directions when Officer Reynolds approached. He didn't ask for my identification. He demanded it. When I inquired why, he escalated instantly." The prosecutor, sensing an opportunity, leaned forward, eyes sharp like a predator stalking its prey. "So you admit to questioning his authority?" Olivia's gaze never wavered. "I questioned his motives. There's a difference. A significant one that speaks to the heart of this case." Then, Daniel played the bystander video. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted in an instant. Reynolds' voice rang out, clear and damning. "Women like you need to learn how to listen." The gallery erupted into murmurs of disgust. The judge's gavel struck, demanding order. During recess, Olivia stood by the courthouse window, her reflection overlaying the bustling city below. Daniel approached, clutching new documents, his expression grim yet triumphant. "This is it," he said, handing her the file. Reynolds' personnel record, multiple complaints of excessive force. All buried. A clear pattern of targeting minorities, especially women. They tried to cover it up, but we found it. Olivia exhaled slowly. "It's never been just about me, Daniel. It's about every person who couldn't fight back, every voice that was silenced. We are their voice now." Back in the courtroom, the shift in power was undeniable. Reynolds' confident facade began to crack as Daniel methodically presented the damning evidence. The officers who had once stood in quiet solidarity with him began to edge away, the weight of truth fracturing their unity. Then came the defining moment. "I am Lieutenant Commander Olivia Carter." Retired Navy SEAL, Olivia announced, her voice carrying the weight of her 2-decade-long service. A hush fell over the courtroom. Reynolds paled. Several jurors leaned forward, their expressions shifting from skepticism to rapt attention. "For 20 years, I defended this nation's ideals of justice and equality," she continued, her gaze sweeping across the jury. "I've navigated hostile territories, led teams through some of the most challenging conditions imaginable. But I never expected to face such blatant abuse of power here, at home, on the very streets I swore to protect. Her testimony carried weight, each word illuminating the greater issues at play. That night, Officer Reynolds didn't see a veteran, a citizen, or even a human being. He saw what his prejudices told him to see, someone he could dominate without consequences. Daniel's closing argument rang through the hushed chamber. My client didn't resist arrest. She did something far more threatening to Officer Reynolds. She questioned his unjust actions. This decorated veteran, who spent years defending our freedoms, was brutalized for exercising those very rights. The jury deliberated. As they did, Olivia sat in quiet reflection. This case had transcended her. It had become about accountability, about changing a system that too often protected its own at the cost of justice. The verdict arrived swiftly, not guilty on all charges. But what followed was unprecedented. The jury formally recommended a full investigation into Reynolds' conduct and department practices. The judge, his expression grave, ordered an immediate review of all cases tied to Reynolds. Outside the courthouse, facing a sea of reporters, Olivia stood tall. The same strength that had carried her through countless missions now radiated as she addressed the cameras. "This isn't about revenge," she declared, her voice clear and resolute. "It's about reform, about ensuring that the power we grant to law enforcement comes with proper accountability." The story spread rapidly across social media, igniting a movement for police accountability. Olivia, with her military discipline and unwavering integrity, became the face of the cause. Police departments nationwide began reviewing their training and accountability protocols. In the months that followed, Olivia's case led to the reopening of dozens of others, uncovering a pattern of misconduct that could no longer be ignored. Officer Reynolds was dismissed, facing charges of his own. But for Olivia, the true victory wasn't in the downfall of one officer. It was in the systemic change his exposure had sparked. She began speaking at police academies, advocating for ethical law enforcement. Her unique perspective, both as a veteran and as a victim of police misconduct, became a beacon in the national conversation on reform. Her case became a landmark in police training programs, teaching future officers the importance of ethical conduct and unbiased policing. Her fight for justice had transformed into something much larger, a movement for systemic change. Standing once more on the courthouse steps, months after the verdict, Olivia watched the sunset, its hues reflecting the justice she had fought for. Her phone buzzed, a request from yet another precinct asking her to speak about police reform. She smiled, knowing her battle had ignited a nationwide conversation. Sometimes, she often told young cadets, the toughest fights aren't won with physical strength, but with unwavering dedication to truth. Her SEAL training had prepared her for combat, but it was her moral compass that had led her to this victory.